David never thought his business trip would change everything. He was just a regular guy from Earth who traded special metals between planets. It's nothing fancy, nothing dangerous, just buying and selling stuff to make a living. But here he was, standing in the middle of a crowded marketplace on a distant world called Kepler 7, watching something that made his stomach turn. People were being sold like objects. Real people. Living, breathing human beings with families and dreams. It's all put up for sale to the highest bidder. The air smelled of sweat and fear. Voices shouted numbers as buyers competed for their next purchase. David wanted to leave, to pretend he never saw any of this, but something kept his feet planted firmly on the ground. Then she appeared. The woman they dragged onto the platform was unlike anyone David had ever seen. She stood nearly 7 feet tall with bronze skin that gleamed under the harsh lights. Her arms and shoulders were covered in intricate scars, not from wounds, but from ceremonies. These were the marks of a warrior, someone who had earned her place through years of training in battle. Her name was Kira, and she came from a warrior tribe on the moon of the Tia Prime. The auctioneer spoke about her like she was a prized horse, listing her achievements in battle and the number of enemies she had defeated. But David wasn't listening to the numbers. He was looking at her eyes. Despite the chains around her wrists and ankles, despite being displayed like merchandise, Kira's eyes burned with defiance. She didn't beg or cry or plead. She stood straight and proud, staring down at the crowd with the kind of look that said she would rather die than surrender her dignity. David learned her story from the whispers in the crowd. Her people had lived on the Cia Prime for thousands of years, following ancient traditions and protecting their sacred lands. They were skilled fighters who valued honor above everything else. When the Galactic Empire decided to expand into their territory, the warriors fought back. It was a hopeless battle. The Empire had advanced weapons and endless soldiers. The warriors had courage and skill, but it wasn't enough. One by one, their cities fell. Their temples were destroyed. Their people were scattered across the galaxy like seeds in the wind. Kira had been one of the last to fall. She had fought until her weapon broke, until her armor was shattered, until she could barely stand. Even then, it took 20 soldiers to bring her down. He kept her alive because dead warriors don't sell for much at market now. Here she was, being sold to the highest bidder. The crowd was full of wealthy collectors who wanted a famous warrior for their private armies. There were gladiator masters who ran fighting arenas where people battled for entertainment. There were others with darker purposes that David didn't want to think about. The bidding started at 10,000 credits. David's heart sank as the price climbed higher and higher. 20,000. 30,000. 40,000. These people were treating a human life like an expensive toy. David looked at his personal account balance on his wrist device. He had been saving for years to buy his own ship, to become an independent trader instead of working for someone else. 45,000 credits, everything he had worked for, everything he had dreamed of. The bidding slowed down at 48,000. Only 2 bidders remained. A fat man in expensive robes, who owned several gladiator arenas, and a thin woman with cold eyes who collected rare warriors like trophies. That's when David heard himself shouting, 50,000. The entire marketplace went silent. Every head turned to look at him. David felt his legs shaking, but he forced himself to stand tall. He had just bid his entire life savings on a woman he had never met, from a world he had never visited. The fat man looked annoyed. He raised his hand. 55,000. David's mouth went dry. He didn't have 55,000 credits. He didn't even have 51,000. But as he looked up at Kira on the platform, he saw something that changed everything. For just a moment, her mask of defiance slipped. In her eyes, he saw a flicker of hope. Not hope for rescue warriors like her didn't expect to be saved, but hope that maybe, just maybe, her next owner might be different from the others. David thought about his comfortable life on Earth, his small apartment, his steady job, his predictable routine. Then he thought about spending the rest of his life knowing he could have helped someone, but chose to protect his bank account instead. He pulled out his communication device and sent a message to his bank. Emergency loan. Everything he could borrow against his future earnings. His hands were shaking as he typed. 60,000, he called out. The crowd gasped. Even the auctioneer looked surprised. 60,000 credits was more than most people. Made in 5 years. The fat man shook his head and sat down. The thin woman glared at David but didn't raise her hand. She knew when she was beaten. Sold, the auctioneer announced. To the Earthling for 60,000 credits. As David walked toward the platform to complete the transaction, he wondered what he had just done. He was now in debt for the next decade, owned nothing but the clothes on his back, and had just bought a warrior who could probably break him in half without breaking a sweat. But when the chains were transferred to his custody, and he looked into Kira's eyes, he knew he had made the right choice. She studied him with the intensity of a predator, trying to figure out what kind of person he was. "Why?" she asked, in heavily accented standard language. "Why does a soft merchant buy death for himself?" David took a deep breath. In the distance, he could hear the next auction beginning. More lives being sold, more families being torn apart. He looked at the heavy chains in his hands, and then at the woman who had just become his legal property. Because, he said quietly, everyone deserves a choice in their destiny. For the first time since her capture, Kira smiled. The walk to David's ship felt like the longest journey of his life. Kira moved beside him with the grace of a jungle cat, her chains clinking softly with each step. Even though she was technically his prisoner, David felt like he was the one, being watched and judged. His ship wasn't much to look at, just a small cargo vessel he used for trading between planets. It had enough space for his living quarters, a tiny kitchen, and storage for whatever goods he was transporting. Nothing fancy, but it had been his home for the past 5 years. Once they were safely inside and the doors were sealed, David did something that surprised them both. He pulled out a small electronic key and unlocked Kira's chains. The heavy metal fell to the floor with a loud clang that echoed through the ship. Kira rubbed her wrists where the chains had been, her eyes never leaving David's face. She was trying to figure out what kind of game he was playing. In her experience, people who bought warriors didn't usually remove their restraints. "There's an escape pod over there," David said, pointing to a small door near the back of the ship. "I can drop you off at the next neutral space station. Oh, you'll be free to go wherever you want." Kira didn't move. She just stood there, studying him with those intense amber eyes. "You paid 60,000 credits for me," she said slowly. "Why would you let me go?" David shrugged, trying to look more confident than he felt. "Because buying people is wrong. I couldn't stop what happened to your world, but I could at least help one person." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the ship, they could hear the sounds of the marketplace continuing. More auctions, more lives being sold. Kira walked over to the small window and looked out at the crowded streets below. "World is gone," she said quietly. "My people are scattered across the galaxy. I have nowhere to go." David felt his heart break a little. He'd been so focused on freeing her that he hadn't thought about what would happen next. Where does a warrior go when her war is over? What does a protector do when there's nothing left to protect? "I'm sorry," he said. "I wish I could have done more." Kira turned away from the window and looked at him again. This time her expression was different, less suspicious, more curious. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Most humans I've met are either afraid of my people or want to use us for fighting." "I'm not most humans," David replied. "I'm just a trader trying to make an honest living." That's when the alarms started blaring. David rushed to the control panel and saw 3 ships approaching fast. They were painted black with red markings, the colors of the Crimson Raiders, a group of pirates who attacked merchant vessels in this sector. "We need to get out of here," David said, his fingers flying over the controls. "Hold on." But it was too late. The pirates had already surrounded them. David's little ship was fast, but it wasn't fast enough to outrun 3 military-grade fighters. Within minutes, they were being boarded. David grabbed a small energy weapon from his emergency kit. But his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He wasn't a fighter, he was a businessman. The closest he'd come to combat was arguing. With customers about prices, the pirates burst through the airlock like a storm. There were 5 of them, all armed with weapons that looked like they could cut through steel. Their leader was a scarred man with gold teeth who grinned when he saw David's trembling hands. Well, the pirate captain laughed. What do we have here, a scared little merchant and his pretty slave girl? That's when Kira moved. David had never seen anything like it. One moment she was standing perfectly still, and the next she was in motion. She moved like liquid lightning, flowing between the pirates faster than they could react. Her hands became weapons, striking pressure points and nerve clusters with surgical precision. The first pirate went down before he could even raise his weapon. The second managed to fire a shot that scorched the wall where Kira had been standing, but she was already behind him. A quick strike to the back of his neck, and he crumpled to the floor. The remaining 3 pirates tried to work together, but Kira was fighting on a completely different level. She used their own weapons against them, turning their strength into weakness. In less than 30 seconds, all 5 pirates were unconscious on the floor of David's ship. David stared at her in amazement. He had heard stories about Amazon warriors, but seeing one in action was something else entirely. She hadn't even broken a sweat. That was incredible, he said. Kira looked at the unconscious pirates and shrugged. They were sloppy. Real warriors would have been more challenging. David secured the pirates in the ship's small holding area, while Kira examined their weapons. She handled each one with the expertise of someone who had trained with similar tools her entire life. These are good quality, she said, testing the weight of an energy blade. Pirates don't usually carry equipment this advanced. How does that mean? David asked. It means someone with money is backing them. They're not just random thieves. They're organized. As David prepared to report the incident to the space authorities, he realized something important had happened. For the first time since he'd bought her freedom, Kira had chosen to help him. She could have let the pirates take his ship and escaped in the confusion, but instead, she had fought beside him. Thank you, he said. Kira looked at him with something that might have been respect. You freed me from those chains. The least I could do was keep you alive. David had an idea. I know you don't have anywhere to go right now, but maybe we could help each other. I need someone who can protect my ship during dangerous trades. You need time to figure out your next move. It could be temporary, just until you decide what you want to do. Kira considered this. You would trust me with your life?
Oh my.
You just saved it, David pointed out. I'd say that's a good start. For the first time since her capture, Kira smiled. Really smiled. Very well, David of Earth. But I work as your partner, not your property. We share the profits, and we share the risks. David extended his hand. Partners. Kira looked at his outstretched hand for a moment, then grasped it firmly. Her grip was strong enough to crush bones, but her touch was gentle. Partners, she agreed, as their ship jumped to hyperspace. Heading toward their next destination, both of them knew that their lives had just changed forever. David had gained a protector, and Kira had found something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope for a future beyond revenge. The galaxy was a dangerous place, but they would face it together. 6 months had passed since David and Kira became partners, and it had been quite a journey. At first, they clashed about almost everything. David preferred to talk his way out of trouble, while Kira's solution to most problems involved her fists, or weapons. When angry customers complained about prices, David would smile and negotiate. Kira would crack her knuckles and suggest they pay up or find another dealer. But slowly, they learned from each other. David taught Kira about the complex world of interplanetary trade, how to read contracts, understand currency exchanges, and spot dishonest clients. He showed her that sometimes the best victory came from making everyone happy, not from beating your enemies into submission, Kira. In return, opened David's eyes to dangers he had never noticed. She could tell when someone was lying just by watching their body language. She knew which spaceports to avoid and which traders were secretly working with criminals. Her warrior instincts had kept them alive more times than David could count. Their reputation was growing across the galaxy. People talked about the unlikely pair, the gentle Earth trader and his fierce Amazon partner. They were known for fair dealing and honest prices, but also for standing up to bullies and protecting the weak. Word spread about their willingness to help. People who couldn't help themselves, when they discovered workers being treated badly, on mining planets, they would report it to the authorities. When they found families separated by the ongoing wars, they would help reunite them. It wasn't always profitable, but it felt right. David learned that Kira's people had ancient codes of honor that guided their actions. She believed in something called life debt. If someone saved your life, you were bound to them by sacred law until you could repay the favor. That's why she had stayed with him after he freed her from those chains. But somewhere along the way, it had stopped being about debt and started being about friendship. They trusted each other completely. David would fall asleep during long space flights, knowing Kira was watching over him. Kira would share stories of her destroyed homeland, knowing David would never judge her for the pain she carried. Their biggest test came when they received a distress signal from a planet called Zarian. It was a mining world where workers dug up rare crystals under dangerous conditions. The message was desperate. Children were being forced to work in the mines, and the local government was too corrupt to stop it. David wanted to contact the galactic authorities, but Kira shook her head. By the time they investigate, those children will be dead, she said. We need to act now. Zarian was controlled by a powerful corporation that didn't like interference. The planet's surface was covered in deep mines and processing plants that turned the beautiful crystals into industrial materials. The workers lived in crowded camps with barely enough food and water. When David and Kira arrived, they pretended to be potential buyers interested in purchasing crystals. The corporate managers were happy to show them around, bragging about their efficient operation and low costs. What they didn't mention was how they achieved those low costs. David felt sick when he saw the working conditions. Adults labored for 18 hours a day in dangerous tunnels that could collapse at any moment. But the worst part was the children, some as young as 8 years old, crawling through spaces too small for adults to reach the best crystal deposits. This is wrong, David whispered to Kira as they watched a group of children being led into a mine shaft. We have to do something. That night, they put their plan into action. David would cause a distraction by arguing with the managers about prices and contract terms. While everyone was focused on the loud merchant from Earth, Kira would sneak into the children's dormitory and lead them to safety. The plan worked perfectly until someone spotted Kira carrying a sick child who couldn't walk. Alarms began blaring throughout the compound. Security guards with weapons came running from every direction. Kira fought like a warrior goddess, protecting the children while David tried to get their ship ready for takeoff. But there were too many guards, and they had heavy weapons. During the battle, an energy blast meant for David struck Kira in the shoulder. Spinning her around and sending her crashing into a wall, David saw her fall, and something inside him snapped. This gentle trader who had never hurt anyone in his life grabbed a mining tool and charged at the guards. He wasn't skilled like Kira, but he was desperate to protect his friend and the children they were trying to save. Together they fought. Their way to the ship, David helped the wounded children aboard while Kira, despite her injury, held off the guards. Blood was flowing down her arm. She never stopped fighting. Once they were in space and the children were safe, David tried to treat Kira's wound. She was pale and weak, but she refused to show pain. It's nothing, she kept saying. I've had worse. But David could see how much she was hurting. As he carefully cleaned and bandaged her shoulder, she finally opened up about her past. Told him about the day her world was destroyed, how she had watched her family die, how she had been the last of her warrior clan to fall. I failed them, she said quietly. I was supposed to protect my people, but I wasn't strong enough. David looked at her with tears in his eyes. You didn't fail anyone, he said. You saved 23 children today. Your people would be proud. As Kira recovered over the next few weeks, she shared more stories about her culture. She taught David about the sacred ceremonies of her people, their connection to nature, and their beliefs about honor and duty. David realized he wasn't just Traveling with a warrior, he was with the living keeper of an ancient civilization. The children they had rescued were safely delivered to refugee camps, where they would be cared for and educated. Some of them would grow up to become doctors, teachers, or engineers. Others might become warriors like Kira, fighting to protect the innocent. David and Kira's partnership had evolved into something deeper than friendship. They were family now, bound together by shared experiences and mutual respect. The trader had learned courage from the warrior. The warrior had learned compassion from the trader. Their ship continued through the galaxy, carrying not just trade goods but hope for a better future. They had found their purpose together, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, to bring light to the darkest corners of space. The universe was vast and often cruel, but they faced it together, knowing that even small acts of kindness could change everything. The message that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning while David was having breakfast and Kira was sharpening her weapons. Their ship's communication system crackled to life with an urgent transmission from the Galactic News Network. 8. Is GNN with breaking news? The Imperial High Command has issued a galaxy-wide bounty for the capture of Kira of Thesha Prime, the last known Amazon warrior. The reward is 5 million credits for her capture alive. General Korath, military commander of the Outer Rim territories, made this announcement earlier today. David's coffee mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. 5 million. Credits was more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. It was enough to buy a small moon or a fleet of warships. Kira looked up from her weapons with a grim expression. So it begins, she said quietly. Korath was the one who destroyed my world. He led the attack that killed my people. David felt his stomach drop. Why does he want you alive? Why not just put a price on your head? 'Cause killing me would. Make me a martyr, Kira explained. But if he captures me and executes me publicly, it sends a message to anyone who might resist the Empire. It tells them that even the strongest warriors can be broken. Over the next few days, they noticed changes. Everywhere they went, bounty hunters started showing up at every spaceport. Old friends became nervous around them. Some people who had once welcomed them now pretended not to recognize them. But something else was happening too. The people they had helped over the past year were starting to help them back. When bounty hunters got too close, someone would warn them, and they needed supplies. Friendly traders would give them discounts or even donate what they needed. David realized they had been building something without even knowing it. Every child they had rescued, every worker they had protected, every fair deal they had made, it all added up to a network of people who believed in what they were doing. The first real test came at Haven Station, a busy trading post where they had stopped to refuel. David was negotiating with a fuel merchant when he noticed armed figures moving through the crowd. They weren't wearing uniforms, but they moved with military precision. Kira, he said quietly into his communication device. We have company. She was already moving. David could see her weaving through the crowd, staying in the shadows, tracking the hunters who were hunting her. There were at least a dozen of them, all carrying weapons that could stun rather than kill. They wanted their bounty alive. The trap closed quickly. David found himself surrounded by 3 bounty hunters while Kira was cornered near the fuel pumps. The leader, a tall woman with cybernetic implants, stepped forward with a stunning device. Kira, of the Seer Prime, she announced loudly. You're coming with us? Don't make this harder than it needs to be. That's when something beautiful happened. The fuel merchant David had been talking to suddenly spilled a container of slippery lubricant right where the bounty hunters were standing. A group of dock workers accidentally knocked over some cargo containers, blocking the exits. Even some of the station's security guards seemed to be moving very slowly to respond to the disturbance. But the real surprise came when a grizzled old spacer named Rex stood up from a nearby table. David remembered him. They had helped Rex find his kidnapped daughter 6 months ago. The old man pulled out a military-grade plasma rifle and pointed it at the bounty hunters. The lady said she doesn't want to go with you, Rex said calmly. I suggest you listen to her. More people stood up. A mechanic who had fixed their ship's engines after a meteor strike. The doctor who had treated wounded refugees they had. brought to safety. The bartender whose establishment they had protected from raiders, one by one. Ordinary people who had been helped by David and Kira stepped forward. The bounty hunters found themselves outnumbered 20-1. These weren't trained soldiers, but they were determined people who had seen what real heroes looked like. The leader of the bounty hunters looked around nervously and made a smart decision. "This isn't over," she said, backing away slowly. "The bounty still stands." "Let it stand," called out Rex. "Good luck collecting it." It's the bounty hunters retreated. David felt overwhelmed by what had just happened. These people had risked their lives to protect him and Kira. They had turned a simple trading station into a fortress of friendship. But even as they celebrated this victory, David knew it was just the beginning. General Koreth wouldn't give up easily, and 5 million credits would attract more dangerous hunters than the ones they had just faced. That night, as they prepared to leave Haven Station, Kira sat quietly in the ship's small lounge area, staring out at the stars. David could see the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She wasn't just running from her past anymore. She was carrying the hopes of everyone who believed in their cause. "Are you okay?" David asked, sitting down beside her. Kira was quiet. "For a long moment, my people had a saying," she finally said. "When the storm comes, you can either run from it or become the storm yourself." David understood what she meant. They had been running and hiding for months, but that wasn't going to work anymore. The Empire had forced their hand by putting a bounty on Kira's head. Now they would have to fight back. "What do we do?" he asked. Kira turned to look at him. David saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not just determination, but hope. "We gather the storm," she said. "All these people who helped us today, they're not just random individuals anymore. They're part of something bigger." Over the next few weeks, they began reaching out to their network of friends and allies. The rescued children had grown up, and some had become skilled pilots and engineers. The freed workers had formed their own trading companies and were willing to share resources. The doctors and mechanics and traders they had helped were ready to help in return. David realized that Kira had become more than just a warrior on the run. She had become a symbol of resistance against oppression. People across the galaxy were hearing her story and deciding they wanted to be part of something better. The Empire had made a mistake by putting a bounty on her head. Instead of making her a target, they had made her a leader. Instead of frightening people into submission, they had given them a reason to fight back. As their ship jumped into hyperspace, heading toward a secret meeting with other resistance groups, David looked at his partner and friend. The woman who had once been sold as property was now inspiring an entire galaxy to stand up for freedom. The storm was gathering, and they were at the center of it. 3 years had passed since the bounty was placed on Kira's head, and the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. What started as a friendship between a trader and a warrior had grown into something much bigger. A movement that gave hope to millions of people across hundreds of worlds. The resistance network that David and Kira had accidentally created was now a real force. Former slaves had become ship captains. Rescued children had grown up to become engineers and doctors. Workers who had been freed from terrible conditions now ran their own businesses and used their profits to help others. But the Empire wasn't sitting still either. General Koreth had been hunting them relentlessly, and his forces were getting closer every day. The final confrontation everyone had been expecting was about to begin. The news that changed everything came from an unexpected source. A former Imperial officer named Captain Rodriguez contacted them through their secret communication network. He had shocking information the Empire was holding Amazon prisoners on hidden prison ships scattered throughout the galaxy. "They've been collecting your people for years," Rodriguez told them during an encrypted video call. "Not just from Visha Prime, but from other Amazon settlements too. Koreth has been keeping them alive as trophies." Kira's face went white when she heard this. She had believed she was the last of her people, carrying the weight of an entire civilization on her shoulders. But now she learned that others had survived. They were just trapped in floating prisons. Waiting for rescue, David watched his partner struggle with this revelation. For 3 years, her mission had been about revenge against the man who destroyed her world. Now it became something else entirely, a rescue mission to save her surviving people. "We have to find them," Kira said, her voice filled with determination. "Every single one of them." "I know where they are," Rodriguez continued, "but getting to them won't be easy. The prison ships are heavily guarded and they're scattered across Empire space. You'd need a fleet to rescue them all." David smiled. "For the first time in days, funny thing about that," he said. "We might just have one." Over the past 3 years, their network had grown to include hundreds of ships. Traders like David, reformed pirates who had seen the light, even some Imperial officers who had grown disgusted with their orders. When the call went out for volunteers to help rescue the Amazon prisoners, the response was overwhelming. Ships began gathering at a secret base on the edge of known space. David looked out at the fleet they had assembled and felt amazed. 3 years ago, he had been a simple trader. With one small ship, now he was helping coordinate the largest rescue operation in galactic history. The plan was ambitious, but necessary. They would hit all the prison ships at the same time before the Empire could react and move the prisoners. Each rescue team would have former Imperial officers who knew the ship layouts and security procedures. Kira spent the days before the operation teaching volunteer fighters the basics of Amazon combat techniques. She couldn't turn civilians into warriors overnight, but she could give them enough skills to survive. David helped coordinate supplies and communication between the different ships. The night before they launched the rescue mission, Kira and David sat together in their ship's small observation deck, looking out at the stars. They both knew that tomorrow would either bring victory or disaster. "Are you scared?" David asked. Kira considered the question seriously. "I used to be scared of dying before I could get revenge," she said. "Now I'm scared of failing the people who are counting on us." David understood. They weren't just two people anymore. They represented hope for thousands of others. The weight of that responsibility was enormous. The rescue operation began at dawn, Galactic Standard Time. 23 teams hit 23 different prison ships simultaneously. David stayed with the command ship, coordinating the attacks and watching the reports come in. The first few ships were taken with minimal fighting. The prison guards hadn't expected such a coordinated assault. But as word spread through the Imperial fleet, resistance grew stronger. Kira led the team that attacked the largest prison ship, where Captain Rodriguez had said the most important prisoners were being held. The ship was heavily defended, but Kira fought like the warrior goddess her people believed her to be. When she finally reached the prison cells and saw her fellow Amazons for the first time in years, they were thin and weak from captivity, but their spirits hadn't been broken. When they saw Kira, they knew their long nightmare was finally over. The most emotional moment came when Kira found Elder Vera, oldest surviving member of the Amazon Council. The ancient woman had been captured during the first Imperial attacks on the Shaprime. "Little warrior," Elder Vera said, her voice cracked with age and emotion. "You kept your promise. You came for us." "I brought help," Kira replied. Gesturing to David and the other rescue teams, "These people fought beside me to free you." Elder Vera looked at David with curiosity. "This is the Earthling who bought your freedom and changed your destiny." David felt embarrassed by the attention. "I just did what anyone would do," he said. The Elder Amazon smiled. "No, young man. You did what a true warrior would do. He saw injustice and chose to fight it, even when it cost you everything." The rescue operation was a complete success. Over 300 Amazon survivors were freed from the prison ships. But more importantly, the galaxy saw that the Empire could be defeated. Other resistance groups began launching their own operations. Inspired by what David and Kira had accomplished, General Korith, humiliated by the rescue of his prisoners, challenged Kira to single combat according to ancient laws that even the Empire recognized. The duel took place on a neutral station, broadcast across the galaxy for everyone to see. The fight was fierce, but short. Korith was a skilled soldier, but Kira was fighting for something bigger than herself. When she finally defeated him, she didn't just win a personal victory, she proved that tyranny could be overcome. With their people freed and their enemy defeated, David and Kira faced a new challenge: what to do next. The Amazons needed a new home, and the resistance movement needed leadership. The solution came from an unexpected source. Using the wealth they had accumulated over their years of trading and the political influence they had gained through their rescue operations, they were able to purchase rights to an entire planet on the edge of civilized space. New Decia became a beacon of hope for refugees and outcasts from across the galaxy. The Amazon survivors, joined by others who had been helped by David and Kira, began building a new civilization based on the principles of freedom and justice. Kira was chosen as the leader of New Decia, but she insisted that David be given equal authority. She made him the first honorary Amazon warrior, a human who had proven himself worthy of their highest honor. Years later, they stood watching the sunset over New Descia's capital city. Kira reflected on the strange path that had brought them here. A simple act of kindness at a slave auction had changed not just her destiny, but the fate of an entire galaxy. "You ever regret it?" she asked David. "Spending all your money to buy a stranger's freedom?" David looked out at the thriving city they had helped build, filled with people who had found new hope and purpose. Children played in the streets while their parents worked to build a better future. Former slaves had become teachers and doctors. Warriors had become protectors of the innocent. "Best investment I ever made," he said with a smile. The Earth Trader and the Amazon warrior had changed each other's destiny, and in doing so, had given hope to millions of others who had thought freedom was impossible. Their story became legend, proving that even in the darkest times, courage and compassion could light the way to a better tomorrow.